Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel where today we are going to be doing a full-length, non-spoilery review of Educated by Tara Westover. So this is an adult nonfiction memoir, and essentially we are following Tara, who grew up in a fundamentalist religious household, um, to parents who were also kind of preppers and anti-government, and she was homeschooled, except like what she learned wasn't what the vast majority of people in school learn, until eventually she goes away to college and she finds out just how much she doesn't know and she needs to educate herself. Now, that's kind of the description that is on the back of this book, but really, this book is about Tara growing up in an abusive household and being so isolated from everybody else she doesn't really know that that's what's going on. She does recognize that things are not quite right, but doesn't have the vocabulary or the framework or the understanding to know what exactly is wrong until she goes away to college. And that's kind of more of what this book is about. Now, because of that, there are massive content warnings for this particular book. There's basically every bit of domestic abuse minus sexual abuse, and all of this abuse is within the framework of them being a fundamentalist religious household. So it's not that the religion says that this is okay, but like how the control and power is exerted is very religious in nature. Um, and I will also say that there is animal abuse that is very brief but very intense. Now, my normal kind of reviews aren't really going to work for this particular book, so we're just going to have a little bit more of a free-form discussion, talking about the writing and then talking about the content. So let's start with the writing. And first up, the thing that really struck me that was done exceptionally well is how Tara wrote this. Because the thing is, like I said, she grew up in a fundamentalist religious household. And also, after she goes away to college, she posits that there's probably some mental health issues within her family as well. And she's very good at walking this line between giving the context and framework for what was going on in her family and why, but not blaming the larger institutions. She's not saying Mormonism at large is awful or is the cause of the abuse, but it does give framework and context to the abuse that she suffered. And same with the mental health thing. And I just think that that's an incredibly hard line to walk that she did absolutely masterfully. I never once thought, oh, fundamentalist Mormonism is to blame, or like fundamentalist religion is to blame. It's more just like how it was used in her home was abusive. And like I said, I think that's a very hard line to walk, and I think she did it very well. One thing that I did not like is a personal preference, but I didn't like how the vast majority of these chapters were structured. So how it was is that we would have like a couple of paragraphs or maybe even a couple pages where we're with present day Tara and she's kind of setting up this story. And then we flash back to a previous incident and Tara takes the time to tell the entire story in the flashback, and then we come to present day and finish out the present day story as well as tying in what happened in the past as well. Which is definitely a very common way to do it. I even understand why you would want to do it, because it's much easier to make a point when you have like multiple events in time to relate. I get it. I completely understand. I just have a hard time with it because you're introducing a story and then asking me to remember those facts as you then tell a different story and expect me to and then tie it all up at the end, which I don't always do very well with. Now, I did better with it in this particular book because most of the chapters were not terribly long, but that's more of an exception rather than the rule. It's just generally not my favorite, and I didn't love it in this book either. And then one other writing thing that I thought was very interesting was that this book is definitely written with a little bit of emotional distance, which I thought worked really well for some things and not so well for others. So, how things are written, it's kind of almost a recitation of facts. We do a lot of shallow dives into emotions and occasionally a medium level dive into emotions, though not very much, but never a deep dive. And in some ways, that's really great, right? Like, I would hate to have emotionally evocative writing in all of these scenes with the abuse, even though it would make it hit harder. Like, for me personally, I was already in distress reading this. And so I think having more emotionally evocative writing would just, I don't think that I could have handled it, to be honest. But when we get into the later chapters and Tara is forming relationships with other people, as well as when she's like starting to question some of her familial wisdom or making choices to try something against familial wisdom, like those are big emotional things, both of those, the relationships and making choices against her family that her family would never make. Those are big emotional things. And most of the time, that emotional impact is very, very blunted, which I do think had an impact on the overall story of this. So, very interesting. In some ways, I'm glad we did it because, like I said, I don't think that I could have handled reading this book if it was emotionally evocative. But also, like near the end, it just didn't, I didn't connect with the text as easily. So, good and bad. But overall, I do think that this is a very well written book. And then, as to the content, I will say that this is very interesting, right? And I think that especially if you don't have a ton of experience with abusive situations, you haven't heard a ton of stories, you may not realize just how difficult it is to leave an abusive family sometimes. Like, there are definitely some people who can walk out the door, go cold turkey, and never contact their family again. And there are a lot of people who can't, who have to break ties a little bit at a time and go kind of slowly as you realize which ties have to break, but which you can keep intact. And especially in Tara's case, where she didn't even have the vocabulary or the framework to understand what was going on in her childhood home, it was a very slow process. And I think that it is very informative to that aspect. And watching her discover that this is not how things should be was very interesting. I also found, just generally speaking from her childhood, I did think that the whole prepper anti government um, stuff that with her family was very interesting because I was fascinated to see how her family in particular was trying to prepare for the collapse of society, like what they chose to do and go through with. So I thought that that was very interesting to watch. Um, and then more on the abuse side of things, I think that it was also interesting to watch how the family kind of split. Because a lot of times what you have is some members of the family will think this is abuse, this is not right, kind of things. And then you'll have other people who think that, what are you talking about? This is fine, right? And it's not always clear how things are going to split. And watching how various family members chose which side they were on was very interesting, especially when we find out there are other factors involved in how they make their choice. Trying to not spoil things, but I wanted to mention this because I did find it very interesting how things kind of played out along that. And especially because we're seeing all of this through Tara's perspective, and she does not always know. She's got a lot of baggage. She doesn't always know if people are going to side with her or with her family. And then I do think the one of the things that I was very struck by this book is that Tara's path to how she cut ties with certain members of her family and how she even, like, just everything about her path was very singular, which makes it a very interesting, fascinating story, very gripping kind of memoir, but it also isn't really how things are normally going to go. So I thought that that was very interesting, but it also makes it kind of sad because Tara was honestly afforded a lot of opportunities and she had a lot of really good luck. And that's just not the case with a lot of people trying to get out of abusive situations. And I think it would just we would all do well to remember a lot of that. But otherwise, I honestly thought that this was an incredibly gripping book, occasionally harrowing, very hard hitting, and well written. And I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. So leave me comments down below if you have read this and what your thoughts are, or what you think about if you want to read this. I'd be very interested to know that as well. But that is all I have for this particular video. So if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.